Our next project on the rolls is the steering. So you can see here, Chris is demonstrating how much looseness there is in the steering wheel. Car's off, we're not even moving the wheels, but you can see where we started here. Let's say, where is it at one side of the play? If we can read, read that on one side and then on the other side. So maybe it's at the 15, something like that there.
16.
16, and then how about the other side?
8.
Yeah, so that's quite a bit of play, and when you're driving down the road, it's difficult to really, it's a challenge.
Makes it fun on the highway.
Right. High workload for the driver. So that's what we're trying to eliminate in this activity. So we're going to be pulling the steering column out here, and our first thing is we're going to look at the rubber bushing, which couples the steering column into this transfer gearbox. We'll show you more about that here in a minute. So to take the steering column out, we pull carpets out here, and then you can see this little piece right here. We loosened that up, slid the rubber seal up, and then this part here is a bunch of screws around here, and we've got that loose. And then what we need to do is underneath here, there's the gearbox, top of the gearbox, and then we also have a pinch bolt at the end of the shift rod. We're going to be pulling those out next. So we got the top of the gearbox, 4 bolts removed, or actually there are 4 nuts there, and just about to be able to get the steering column out. We're taking the bracket loose here, and then we should be able to get this out of the car. Once we remove the top half of the housing holding the gear selector, this is what we saw. For some reason, it looks very corroded there, and we have not been able to figure out why. After quite a bit of struggling, we got the steering column out. The reason we were struggling is in the workshop manual, it doesn't say anything about pulling a nut off of here. In fact, it looks like a conical bearing, and it looks like you just pull it out, and that's what the direction said. It wasn't until we saw a video online and just showed what this looks like that we found out, oh yeah, you got to take this nut off to be able to pull the whole thing out. And once we did that, that was the key to the whole thing. And there it is. And you can see, I bet there's never been a fluid change since it was new. Look at that. Nice. So what we're going to do next is look in here and see if our rubber coupling is the culprit. We got the steering shaft out of the steering column, and so this is what it looks like here. We did mark things with Sharpie, which you gotta be careful because the Sharpie could easily rub off, so we may have to remark that with something else. But here you can see the horn wire coming up here. This is where there's a brush that sits here. Yeah, here's the brush, and that rides on that contact, so when you push the horn, it makes contact through this brush. But here's the big thing we found, is look at this. There's pieces of rubber that are kind of out here falling around, and this is supposed to be a nice tight joint here, and clearly that is a serious problem with our steering. So we're going to dig into this next. This was really hard to get off. We had to really pull and yank and even put like a strap wrench on here to try to pull this down, but that reveals our rubber coupling here, which you can see the condition of that is not good, and we saw bits of it earlier. So that's where we are. The next step is we've got some metal rings in here to pull out, and then we'll get this all the way apart. Here's what's left of the rubber piece. You can see it's just really pretty much eaten away. So it's no wonder that the steering was a little sloppy. Yeah, it's just really ground up.
There's nothing left.
Nothing left. And now we're going to pull this apart here, but we're going to have to mark the position of where this comes off here so that we get it exactly back in the right place. And this is what this gear side looks like when it's pulled out. Look at that. There's just really nothing left in there. And then on the other side, the driving side, coming down from the steering column, it's really just kind of a ground up mess of rubber here. So this was our problem. That's why the steering was so loose. So we're going to get this cleaned up and replace a number of parts and put this together. This is the diagram in the workshop manual that shows the steering column shaft coming down here. This is the transfer gearbox right here, and then this is the power steering valve, and then here you actually have the steering box. And so what Chris found out by talking to the folks at Albers is that oftentimes what happens is there's a seal behind this gear here that keeps the power steering fluid, which is under high pressure in this valve, keeps it from coming up into this gearbox. And what happens is, what the Albers folks said was that seal goes bad, and then you start filling power steering fluid up into here where you're just supposed to have 80 weight gear oil. And then what happens is there's no real seal on this side. It's sealed from dirt getting in, but it can just move the fluid into here and overfill, and that's why that rubber bushing, the coupling there, looked so bad, and it was all oily, and that power steering fluid, evidently, according to the Albers folks, it just eats that rubber. And so what we're gonna do is pull the front of this gearbox off, and then pull this gear off, and supposedly there's a seal behind there that we can replace without removing this thing from the car. So that's our next step, is to try to get this front cover off and then get the gear off and then replace that seal. And this is what it looks like on the actual car. So here you can see we've got the front of the transfer case off, came out with that gear. There you can see the gear in here that it mates with. And the task now is to get this front cover off so we can get this gear out and then replace the seal that's behind this gear. With the 4 nuts taken off here, just pulled the bearing cap off, and you can see we've got a nut in there that needs to be probably loosened up, and that looks like that's probably what's holding the gear on there. One of the things that became clear as we were starting to take this apart is that this gear is actually just connected to the steering, and it can move. So to try to get that back in the same place, we made a little mark right here with a Dremel tool on this tooth, and that's the first visible tooth that we have. So that should allow us to get the gear back in the right place. With the 4 bolts off, I was able to just pull the gearbox right out of there. One of the bolts stayed in the housing. It was this lower corner. Just because I couldn't pull it all the way out, it ran into this. So I'll have to remember that on reassembly. But there we go. You can see there's an O-ring left here. And here's the transfer case out of the car. It actually wasn't as bad as I was thinking it was. Here's the bolt that I was mentioning. You really can't get that out because of the firewall right there. So when I put this back together, I have to remember this bolt should be in the casing as I place it in there. And then here you can see yeah, some pretty crusty looking stuff down there, and we're gonna get that cleaned up. And next step is to go in and get the gear off the front of that power steering valve. We've been trying to get this gear off with like a wood wedge under here, and it really is not wanting to come off. I think we could probably use some heat and get it off, but you can't really get a puller in here. There's just not really enough room here. But the other thing is we've got quite a bit of play here. So even if we put all this back together with a new rubber coupler, we're still going to have steering wheel play. So a couple motivations here to pull the steering box. So not being able to get this gear off and also discovering a fair amount of play here has motivated us to pull the steering box altogether. We've got the car jacked up, the wheels off, and the panel that sits here has been removed, and we're starting to get the steering box out. We had to pull the ball joint here, or I should say the tie rod end. We pulled this with kind of a regular actually a Pitman arm puller was what we used here to pull this off. And so next we've got a couple of bolts down below here to get off, and then this arm that comes all the way forward here. And we're getting the bolt off of here, and then we should be able to get this out once we disconnect the hydraulic lines. Okay, we've gotten, I think, all of the bolts out. This looks pretty loose here. We're gonna see if we can get this all the way out of the car. Oh, we still have lines connected on the other side. All right, so we've got all of the connections loose. And here's the steering box coming out. Pretty heavy, but it's doable. And luckily we had the transfer gear box off. That made it a little bit easier to maneuver around in here, but here it is, out of the car, and we're gonna have that rebuilt. So here's the steering box out of the car. We just have it here getting cleaned up. Notice this is how much Chris can turn the gear there while holding the pitman arm there so that it doesn't move. So again, you can see that we definitely have play in the steering system, and rebuilding this box should remove that.
One other thing we did earlier, we didn't really have power steering much. Ronnie's Garage on YouTube suggested adding a pint of power steering fluid around STP engine treatment in. We did that, and that brought the power steering back probably about 40 or 50% better than it was. We could actually feel it. So when we hit the point of finding this play in the box, we decided to go ahead and just dive into this and have the box rebuilt.
While we were under the car working on getting the steering box out, we decided we better grease the grease fittings, and these are what they look like. It's kind of an interesting, like a flat fitting like that. So after doing a lot of cleanup on those, then we re-greased them, and here's what the adapter looks like to the grease gun. So you can see it's kind of a little horn that kind of slips over that grease fitting. And here, Chris is gonna grease this fitting right here, and we can see what that looks like. So go ahead. Just slips over just like that. And then you pump in the grease gun, and the grease is coming out somewhere. That's all there is to it. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. There we go. And that's all there is to it. It's pretty handy. Interesting grease fitting, not typical of German or American cars, but sure is effective. Stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about what we're going to do about this steering box. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.